Welcome to Pluralsight. You are watching What's New in version 2.4. So near the end of this course, as it was being produced, EMC released version 2.4 of the Extreme IO software. And we thought it'd be a good idea to go ahead and put a module at the end to kind of talk about some of the changes. So there are some new additions or changes to the features here, and a few of these things will, I guess, supersede some of the points that I made in a few of the earlier lessons, and I'll do my best to point those out. Nothing crazy, but just a couple of things that we couldn't do before. So one thing you can now do is snapshots. As I showed in an earlier demo, the snapshots was grayed out, but we now have that in 2.4. I talked about the mechanism that it used, even though we couldn't do it, but now we can, and I'll show you a demo of that. Encryption. So a very common request we get from customers, especially in the healthcare space, is about what's called DARE, data at rest encryption, meaning data stored on an array is encrypted in case someone were to pull some drives out or, take anything from the system. Now, it does not encrypt data as a host sees it. So if you zone in a host and they have access to a volume, you don't have to do anything special to decrypt that data to them. They'll see it as decrypted. These use self-encrypting drives, and the data gets encrypted as it is literally written to the drive. iSCSI enhancements. We'll hit on these in a minute, but a few things that we couldn't do there, we can now do. There's the RESTful API is now available. There is a guide from EMC to go through all the API calls. So if you want to automate deployment or management of an Extreme IO, you can now do this using a very useful RESTful API. You can resize volumes on the fly. So now if you want to extend the size of a volume or even a snapshot, you can do that without affecting the host or having to back up and then restore data back to the volume. You can now do that on the fly. And finally is AIX support. I won't get too deep into this, but if you do have AIX systems and you want them to access Extreme IO, 2.4 now allows you to do that. One thing, EMC has changed a lot or most of the default passwords. And this is new again as of the 2.4 release. If you've already deployed Extreme IO, it should not change any of your passwords on update, but only on new installs. And they have asked for these passwords not to be made publicly available. I'm not entirely sure why they do this. They actually asked me to take them out of a blog post that I did when I was talking about deploying Extreme IO. But a couple of things. So one, if you're going through the course because you just generally want to know more about Extreme IO and how it's deployed, this is not a big deal. If you are looking to deploy Extreme IO, work with EMC when you purchase your Extreme IO, and they should be able to get you those passwords. There's also, if you work for a partner, there is a KB article on support.emc.com. So if you're going through the course, you guys are getting ready to start doing Extreme IO services and you just happen to be using this. If you go to support.emc.com, there is a KB article with all of the current passwords in it, so you can reference that. So unfortunately, a few of these things have changed, but it's probably not that big of a deal. Snapshots. So we've talked about this in an earlier lesson, and now we can actually use them. It does let you take snaps from either regular volumes or other snapshots and create kind of this snapshot tree. There's no performance penalty for accessing a snap. When you think about it again, snaps are just additional pointers in the metadata table that's kept in memory. So accessing a snap is a lot like accessing data that has been deduped. We're just pointing to a different place, and with this 0 millisecond solid state disk access that we have, there's really no penalty. So you can just create those snaps and use them and do whatever you want. You can also mount them to host and make them read-write, just like you would any other volume. You can also resize them, oddly enough, and you can resize a snap and it doesn't affect the original volume, and vice versa. It is again fast. It's all in memory. It's all metadata. So you can create these, add them, delete them. You can delete the snap in the middle. We'll do this in the lab in a minute, and it won't affect the additional snaps off of that one. So it'll just kind of join that tree back together. Some arrays, when you delete a snap in the middle of snaps, anything from that snap and newer gets deleted as well, but not with Extreme IO. Hit on this again, data at rest encryption. It encrypts data on the drives in the cluster. It uses self-encrypting drives in the disk enclosure. Protects against the theft of media. If someone hacks into a server that has access to the data, it doesn't protect against that. It only protects against someone stealing the physical disks. Can encrypt data that already exists, so this is nice. There have been other, or in the past, it was often common that if you wanted to turn on data at rest encryption, you had to do it on a new array, or you had to take all your data off, turn it on, and then put your data back. But you can now turn this on, and it will go through and encrypt all data in the cluster. It is supported on the 20 terabyte bricks and the newer 10 terabyte bricks, so that gets a little confusing. So depending on when you buy your bricks, if you buy a 10 terabyte, you may then now see support for that. So check and see when you got it. If it shipped after 2.4 shipped, my understanding from EMC is that it will support these. And we'll show you this in the lab in a minute. Mine does not. It's an original 10 terabyte and it tells me that. But if you want to do this and you're buying to 10 terabyte, make sure it does support it. Or if you're adding on to an existing 10 terabyte, make sure it does support it. But all the 20s and anything after this should support it no problem. iSCSI enhancements. So we can now do jumbo frames up to 9K frames. We can change the iSCSI TCP port. This is kind of a hassle, to be honest with you. You have to stop the cluster services. Then you can change the port, and then you have to start the cluster services. If you do it during a maintenance window, it's not a big deal. You just run a stop cluster command from the XMCLI, change it in the UI, and then run a start cluster command. But you actually have to be taking a hard maintenance window, so nothing will try to access the cluster. The only saving grace to this, in my opinion, is that I don't think I've ever seen anybody change the default TCP port for iSCSI. So it's probably a very underused feature, but if you need to do it, you'll have to stop the cluster. CHAP and mutual CHAP. So now you can do CHAP authentication for iSCSI, a pretty common feature. They've now added that. And finally, single point discovery. Basically what this means is you can set up multiple targets, iSCSI portals, on the XtremIO, and if you point a host to one of those targets, it can ask the cluster for the rest of them. So you don't have to configure all of them. You can say, hey, give me one target and I'll go discover the other targets. So then it'll get an ask and it'll start using those as well. So now let's jump to the lab. In the lab, we're just going to look at these cool new features. So we'll walk through to the UI, I'll show you the new iSCSI features, and I'll walk you through using snapshots. So with that, let's go ahead and jump on over to the lab.